Hello, night seekers, and welcome to Sleepy Shadows, your quiet corner of the night, where whispers replace the noise of the world. Before you fall asleep tonight, these stories found you for a reason. Some stories wait in the dark for someone who needs them. Maybe tonight, that someone is you. Wherever you're listening from, I'm truly glad you're here. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? If these stories help you unwind, subscribe, so you always have a place to return to. Now, take a slow breath in and gently exhale. Close your eyes, and let's drift into the shadows. I have an uncle who experiences things like this fairly regularly. That alone wouldn't mean much, except for the kind of person he is. He's serious, grounded, not dramatic, not someone who tells stories for attention or entertainment. He's the type who thinks carefully before he speaks and doesn't waste words. Because of that, when he tells a story, people listen. And because of that, I believe him. One story in particular stuck with me. It happened years ago, and the way he told it was calm, though almost casual, which somehow made it more unsettling. He said he was driving down a country road after running some errands. It was summertime in the St. Louis area, the kind of heat that presses down on everything. The air feels thick, the sun feels aggressive, and being outside too long can make you miserable fast. The road he was on was mostly empty. Long stretches with no houses, no businesses, just fields, ditches, and trees. The kind of road where you might see a car every now and then, but not much else. As he drove, he noticed a family walking along the side of the road. That alone wasn't especially strange, but something about them immediately stood out. First, none of them were wearing shoes. Not the adults, not the child. They were walking barefoot on hot pavement and gravel, which didn't make sense in that heat. Then there were their clothes. They weren't wearing anything modern. No t-shirts, no jeans, no sneakers. Instead, they wore loose garments, on more like shawls or wraps, draped over their bodies. The fabric looked simple, almost old-fashioned. Nothing flashy, nothing recognizable as current style. There were three of them, a man, a woman, and a child walking quietly together. Given the heat, the isolation of the road, and the fact that they were barefoot, my uncle slowed down and pulled over. He said it didn't feel heroic or dramatic. It just felt like the right thing to do. They were clearly far from anything, and it was brutally hot. He offered them a ride. They accepted without hesitation. The man spoke for the group. He said their house was just a few miles down the road. Nothing about his voice stood out. No accent my uncle could place. No unusual tone. Just calm, polite speech. They got into the car. My uncle said they didn't smell bad. They didn't seem dirty or distressed. They were quiet, reserved, almost subdued. The child didn't fidget or talk. The woman stared out the window. The man gave directions calmly, as if this was completely normal. A few miles later, they approached a small cottage-like house sitting alone near the road. It wasn't grand or modern, just a simple structure, tucked back slightly, with grass around it and nothing else nearby. My uncle pulled over. The family got out. They thanked him. No lingering, no hesitation. They walked toward the house, and that was that. My uncle drove away without thinking much more about it. Weeks passed. One day, he was driving down the same road with my aunt. At some point, he casually mentioned the experience, pointing ahead and saying something like, "Up here is the house where I dropped that family off." He expected to see it again. But when they reached the spot, there was nothing there. No house, no driveway, no foundation. No signs that anything had ever stood there at all. Just a ditch and grass stretching out beside the road, uninterrupted. My uncle slowed down, confused. He checked the area again as they passed. Then he turned around and drove back, scanning the roadside carefully. Still nothing. My aunt remembers this part clearly. She corroborated it later without hesitation. She said he went quiet, visibly unsettled, not panicked, but disturbed in a way she'd never really seen before. He wasn't trying to make sense of it out loud. He was processing it internally. There was no explanation that made sense. This wasn't a memory from decades ago. It had only been weeks. The road was the same. The location was the same. He was certain. He hadn't taken a different turn. He hadn't confused one place for another. The house simply wasn't there. My uncle never tried to explain what happened. He didn't label it as paranormal or supernatural. He didn't claim ghosts or time travel or anything like that. He just stated the facts as he experienced them and left it at that. I've always considered myself skeptical about things like this. I look for rational explanations. I question memories. I doubt perceptions. But the fact that it was him telling the story, and the fact that my aunt backed it up without embellishment, made it hard to dismiss completely. There was no benefit to lying, no drama added, no conclusion forced. Just an experience that didn't fit neatly into reality. And that's what makes it linger in my mind. Not fear, not belief. Just the uncomfortable realization that sometimes things happen that don't leave behind answers. "4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that had been converted into 2 separate apartments. From the outside, it looked quiet and ordinary, the kind of place you'd expect to feel peaceful because of how much space surrounded it. But the house had a history, and everyone in the area knew it. People called it the old boys' home. Years earlier, it had been used to house boys with serious behavioral issues. It was eventually shut down after allegations of molestation came to light. But no one liked talking about it in detail, but the reputation never went away. Even so, at the time, I tried not to think about that. We needed a place to live, and the apartment itself seemed fine. I was living there with my boyfriend and my 3-year-old daughter. Day to day, life felt normal enough. The house was old, but old houses always are. Creaks, drafts, strange sounds at night. I told myself not to read too much into anything. Our bedroom was large, and one of its main features was an old fireplace. It had been boarded up and painted over long before we moved in. It didn't look usable anymore, just a flat section of wall where something used to be. It didn't bother me at first. It was just there. One day, while rearranging the room, I decided to push our bed up against the fireplace wall. It worked perfectly as a headboard, and I liked how it looked. It felt solid, sturdy, almost grounding. I didn't think twice about it. That night, and everything changed. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up to a small voice. It was quiet, but clear. Mommy. It sounded like my daughter. Still half asleep, I sat up in bed, my heart already tightening with concern. I didn't see anything in the dark, but I assumed she was standing beside the bed, trying to climb in with us. She did that sometimes after having bad dreams. Without turning on the light, I leaned over my boyfriend and reached down toward the side of the bed, feeling around for her little body. As I did, I kept hearing the voice, repeating my name softly, but my hands didn't touch anything. I reached farther. Still nothing. That's when my boyfriend stirred and woke up. He turned on the bedside lamp, squinting at me in confusion and asking what the hell I was doing. I told him Amelia was trying to get into our bed and that I was reaching for her. The moment the room filled with light, the voice stopped. There was no one there. My daughter was not in the room. We checked on her immediately. She was sound asleep in her own bed, breathing evenly, completely undisturbed. She hadn't gotten up. She hadn't made a sound. I didn't sleep much after that. The next night, almost the exact same time, around 1 a.m, something else happened. Our dog started whimpering at the back door, the way he did when he needed to go outside. My boyfriend got out of bed and left the room to let him out. I stayed where I was, lying on my side, trying to calm myself and convince my mind that the night before had been a half-dream. Then I felt it. That familiar sensation when someone lies down beside you in bed. The mattress shifted. The bed dipped slightly behind my back. There was warmth, close and undeniable, pressing gently against me. I didn't question it. I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed and laid down quietly. I rolled over to face him. He wasn't there. At the exact moment I realized that, I felt the bed release. The pressure lifted instantly, as if whatever had been lying next to me had stood up the second I turned. There was no gradual movement, no shifting, just sudden absence. I froze. My boyfriend was still outside. I could hear him in the distance, talking to the dog. There was no one else in the room. Nothing visible, nothing moving. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that something had been there. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just lay there, heart pounding, staring into the dark until my boyfriend came back into the room. I didn't tell him what had happened right away. I don't even know why. Maybe part of me was afraid to say it out loud. The next day, I moved the bed. I dragged it across the room and placed it on the opposite wall, as far from the fireplace as possible. I didn't care how the room looked anymore. I just wanted distance. After that, nothing else happened. No voices, no pressure, no sensations. When we lived in that house for another 2 years, and I never experienced anything like that again. The room felt normal once the bed was moved. Not comforting, exactly, but neutral. Like whatever line had been crossed had been uncrossed. I still think about those 2 nights. About how the voice sounded exactly like my daughter. About how real the weight in the bed felt. And about how quickly everything stopped once I moved away from that wall. I don't know what was there, but I know it was close. And for those 2 nights, it felt far too familiar. My wife and I were in Las Vegas, having what felt like a perfect weekend. Nothing extravagant, just time together, laughing, walking around late at night, enjoying being away from normal life for a few days. It was one of those trips where everything feels light, where problems feel far away and unreal. Then, early in the morning, the phone rang. The call came before the sun was fully up, and I knew instantly that something was wrong. You don't get calls like that at that hour with good news on the other end. When we answered, we were told that my father-in-law had passed away during the night. The shock was immediate and total. One moment we were on vacation, disconnected from everything. The next, we were thrown straight back into reality. There wasn't time to process it properly. We threw our things together, checked out, and rushed to get back to the rest of the family as fast as we could. The drive felt endless, or when we finally arrived, the house was already full. Family members were sitting together, talking quietly, sharing memories, trying to make sense of what had happened. That strange atmosphere had settled in, the one that comes right after a death, where everything feels both heavy and unreal at the same time. We joined them, hugging people, listening, adding our own memories. Time felt strange, like it was stretching and collapsing all at once. Not long after we arrived, a new concern came up. Someone asked how we were going to tell our niece. At the time, she was in prison. There were rules about phone calls, timing, who could contact her and when. We all knew she deserved to know, but none of us knew the right way to do it, or how quickly it could even happen. We were standing there, talking it through, trying to decide who would call and what they would say. That's when the phone rang again. Out of nowhere. Someone answered it, and their expression changed immediately. Or they put the call on speaker. It was our niece. The first thing she asked was what had happened to Grandpa. The room went silent. She sounded shaken, panicked, already halfway to tears. Before anyone could answer, she explained why she was calling. She said she had just woken up from a dream. In it, her grandfather had come to her. He didn't say much. He just told her goodbye. She said it felt real. Too real. Real enough that it scared her. She said she woke up with a feeling that something was wrong, that she needed to call immediately. So she did. None of us had told her yet. No one had contacted the prison. No message had been sent. There was no way she should have known anything at all. And yet she did. The realization hit all of us at once. People started crying. Others just stood there in stunned silence. There was no dramatic reaction, no screaming or disbelief. Just this shared, quiet moment where everyone understood how impossible the timing was. She was calling to ask what happened. We were standing there trying to figure out how to tell her. I don't know what you call something like that. I don't know if it was coincidence, intuition, grief traveling in ways we don't understand, or something else entirely. I don't pretend to have an explanation that fits neatly into logic. All I know is that, somehow, she knew. And she knew before we could find the words to tell her. Even now, when I think about that moment, it doesn't scare me in a traditional way. It doesn't feel dark or threatening. It feels quiet, heavy, meaningful in a way that's hard to put into words. Like a goodbye that refused to wait. My wife and I were staying at a beautiful hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. It was a special trip for us. I had planned the whole thing carefully, down to the room itself, because this was where I was going to ask her to marry me. We'd had a long, lavish meal that night, the kind where you lose track of time and feel like the rest of the world doesn't exist. When we got back to the room, everything felt perfect. I had chosen that particular room for one very specific reason. It had a massive Japanese soaking tub. The thing was enormous. I'm 6'1", and when I sat in it, the water came all the way up to my chin, and I could barely see over the edge. It felt indulgent in the best possible way, like pretending to be far wealthier and more relaxed than we actually were. The first night, after everything finally settled down, we went to sleep in the single king bed. The room was quiet, dark, and comfortable. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. I remember glancing at the alarm clock. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning. To my left, just a few feet away, I heard a sound that was so specific, it snapped me awake instantly. It sounded exactly like a wooden pencil slowly rolling down a sloped surface. Not clattering, not falling. Rolling. Deliberate, steady, unmistakable. The ridged sound of wood turning over itself. It was loud enough that it woke both of us up. My heart jumped, but almost immediately, my brain stepped in and tried to be reasonable. I convinced myself it must have been a pencil sliding off a desk somewhere in the room. Hotels usually have desks. Someone must have bumped something earlier, and gravity finally did its thing. It made sense, or at least enough sense that I let myself relax. Within moments, I fell back asleep. The next morning, though, that explanation unraveled. As we were getting ready for the day, I casually looked around the room. That's when I realized two things that made my stomach tighten just a little. First, there were no pencils. Second, there was no desk. It was our first night in the room, and I'd just assumed, like most hotels, that there would be some kind of writing surface. But there wasn't. The room was open, minimal, thoughtfully designed. The only things I could find to write with were capped ballpoint pens. Plastic. Smooth. They wouldn't make that sound. Not even close. Even stranger, there wasn't a single sloped surface in the room where anything could slowly roll off in the middle of the night. No angled tables, no tilted shelves, nothing. We stood there talking about it for a while, replaying the sound in our heads. We both remembered it clearly. It wasn't vague, it wasn't imagined. It had that same quality as hearing someone knock on a door or drop a glass. Your brain instantly categorizes it because it's so familiar. I don't believe in ghosts. Not really. But I've always liked the idea of encountering something unexplained. Something that makes you pause and admit that you don't have all the answers. I joked about a ghost pencil. But deep down, I was certain there had to be a normal explanation. I just didn't know what it was. At the time, that felt like the end of it. It wasn't. That night, we decided to use the soaking tub. It was February, and Pittsburgh in February is cold, gray, and miserable. The tub was everything I'd hoped it would be. The water was hot, almost too hot, steam rising into the air. We were laughing, sloshing around, pretending we were rich, pretending this was our everyday life. Then, from the other room, we heard a sound that didn't belong. It was the buzzing hum of an old microphone connected to a PA system. That harsh, electric feedback sound that comes right before someone makes an announcement. The kind of sound that instantly makes your shoulders tense. The noise filled the room. Our hearts started pounding all over again. The sound was loud, clear, and directional, as if it were coming from somewhere specific, not just echoing through pipes or walls. And then we both nearly jumped out of our skin. We heard someone blow into the microphone, not a breath, not static, but that very specific testing sound. Wooth, wooth. It was so clear that you could picture it happening. Someone leaning toward a microphone, checking if it was live. Just like the pencil. The sound was unmistakable. My heart went from pounding to fluttering so fast it felt unreal. Naked, I leapt out of the tub and grabbed a towel, wrapping it around myself as quickly as I could. That was a man blowing into a microphone, I said out loud, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. My wife stayed in the tub, silent, eyes wide, frozen in place. I searched the room. Every corner, every wall, every ceiling line. There was no speaker, no intercom, no visible grill. There's nothing embedded anywhere that could explain it. The only speaker in the room was an iHome, and it was already playing music from my phone. There was no way that sound came from it. We couldn't find a source. Still, we stayed the rest of the night. We were riding high on adrenaline, on excitement, on the fact that we were engaged. The strange sounds didn't ruin the experience. If anything, they added to it. It felt like the hotel itself had marked the moment somehow, or like the place had decided to make itself known. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I emailed the hotel and asked about the building's history. Pittsburgh is an old city. Downtown Pittsburgh is even older. I figured there had to be a story there. When they replied, my jaw dropped. They told me the building had once been a telephone factory. Suddenly, everything clicked. The microphone, the PA system, the sounds of announcements and testing equipment, or the drafting tables where pencils would roll if nudged just slightly. All of it belonged to another time, another version of that building's life. I don't know why that explanation felt so satisfying. It didn't prove anything. It didn't explain how sounds from the past could echo into the present. But it gave shape to the experience. It gave it context. And in a strange way, it made the whole thing feel more real. Not haunted. Just remembered. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. I was walking into the house after work, sometime around 6 in the evening. It was that strange hour where the day isn't fully over, but it doesn't really feel like daytime anymore either. The sun hadn't completely set, but the light was already fading, draining out of the sky in that dull, tired way. Everything looked slightly washed out, like the world had lost some of its sharpness. It wasn't dark enough to turn the porch light on yet, but it was dark enough that shadows were starting to stretch and soften at the edges. The sky had that flat, muted color it gets just before night fully settles in. It was quiet, too. Not silent, but subdued. No cars passing at that moment, no voices nearby, just the low background noise of an ordinary neighborhood winding down. I was halfway up the walkway, keys in my hand, already thinking about nothing in particular. My mind was on autopilot, on moving from the day I'd just had toward the comfort of being home. Dinner, sitting down, maybe watching something mindless on TV, nothing unusual, nothing tense. Then it happened. The entire sky lit up bright green. Not a flicker, not a distant flash, not something gradual. It was instant. Like someone had flipped a switch and replaced the sky above me with pure color. A vivid, unnatural green flooded everything overhead, washing the world in light so sudden and intense it felt invasive. At the exact same moment, there was a sound. It wasn't just loud, it was violent. A sharp, explosive zap that felt like it cut through the air itself. The sound wasn't rolling or echoing like thunder. It was quick, aggressive, and mechanical, the kind of noise you'd expect from a movie laser or some kind of high-energy weapon firing. It didn't come from far away. It didn't feel distant at all. It felt like it was right over my head. Too close, way too close. My body reacted before my brain had time to form a single thought. There was no pause, no moment of confusion. Pure instinct took over. I hit the ground immediately, dropping flat without even realizing I was doing it. My hands scraped the pavement, my knees slammed down, and my heart exploded into motion inside my chest. Before I even processed what had just happened, I was already moving again. I scrambled back up and tore straight toward the house, adrenaline flooding my system so fast it felt like my chest might burst open. My vision felt narrow, my hearing sharp and distorted at the same time. All I knew was that I needed to get inside. I burst through the front door like I was being chased. One of my roommates was in the kitchen, completely calm, standing at the stove and cooking dinner. The smell of food filled the room. Oil sizzling, something bubbling quietly in a pan. But the contrast between his normal behavior and what I had just experienced almost made me feel dizzy. I started talking immediately, my voice half shouting, half shaking. I demanded to know if he'd seen that, if he'd heard it, if he'd seen the sky light up green just seconds ago. He hadn't. He looked at me like I had completely lost my mind. He asked what I was talking about. He said he hadn't heard anything unusual. No loud noise, no flash of light. Nothing. But he had been standing right there the whole time, cooking, completely unaware that anything out of the ordinary had happened. I kept insisting. I told him it had just happened. Right outside, seconds earlier. I must have sounded frantic because after a moment, he put the food aside and agreed to come outside with me to check. We stepped back out onto the walkway. The evening looked exactly the same as it always did. The sky was normal. No strange color, no glow, no lingering brightness. And the street was quiet and unchanged. Porch lights from neighboring houses were starting to come on, one by one, as if nothing at all had interrupted the routine of the day. We stood there, scanning everything. Nothing was wrong. No power outages anywhere on the street. No flickering lights, no transformers blown. In fact, there weren't even transformers nearby that could have caused something like that. Every house had electricity. No alarms going off. And no people outside looking confused or alarmed. There were no scorch marks on the ground. No smoke in the air. No burning smell. No ozone scent. No sign of disturbed air or debris. Nothing broken. Nothing out of place. The street looked exactly the same as it always had. That's what messed with me the most. If there had been damage, I could have accepted it. If someone else had seen it, I could have rationalized it. If the power had gone out, or a transformer had blown, or anything at all had changed, I could have built an explanation around it. But there was nothing. I've always been a rational person, a grown man who believes in science. I'm usually the one who pushes back when people jump to wild conclusions. I believe most things have explanations grounded in physics, weather patterns, or human infrastructure. Lightning, electrical failures, atmospheric effects. There's almost always a logical answer if you look hard enough. But this didn't fit. It wasn't distant lightning. Lightning doesn't make the entire sky go green in an instant like that, especially not directly overhead without thunder rolling afterward. It wasn't a transformer explosion. Those are bright, but they're localized, and they cause power outages and damage. It wasn't fireworks. The sound was wrong, the color was wrong, and there was no follow-up noise or debris. It wasn't a trick of the light either. It was too intense, too physical, too specific, or that green color burned itself into my memory. It wasn't a soft green or a pale glow. It was sharp, vivid, almost artificial. A color that didn't belong in the sky, and the sound wasn't thunderous or booming. It was sharp and immediate, like energy discharging violently through the air. What unsettles me the most isn't just what happened. It's how alone the experience was. I was the only one who saw it. The only one who heard it. Seconds later, the world had completely reset itself, leaving no evidence that anything unusual had occurred at all. It was as if the moment had been surgically removed from reality, leaving only my memory behind. No witnesses, no damage, no explanation. Life continued as if nothing had happened. My roommate went back to cooking. The food didn't burn. The night went on. But I couldn't shake it. Even as I sat inside, trying to calm myself down, my body still felt wired, alert, waiting for something else to happen. I think about that moment more than I want to admit. Sometimes it comes back when I'm walking outside at dusk, when the light looks similar and the sky feels heavy. Sometimes it comes back when I hear a sudden noise overhead or see an unexpected flash of light. In those moments, everything snaps back instantly. The green sky, the sound, the feeling of my body slamming into the ground before my mind had time to catch up. What stays with me most is how automatic my reaction was. There was no decision involved, no fear to analyze. My body simply knew that something was wrong and acted faster than thought. I still don't know what happened that evening. I've replayed it in my head countless times, searching for a detail I might have missed, something I could reinterpret or explain away. But every time, it comes back the same. Sudden, violent, isolated. And that's the part that sticks with me. Not fear, not belief. Just the uncomfortable realization that sometimes, something can happen right in front of you, violently and unmistakably real, and still leave you with absolutely nothing to hold on to afterward. No proof. No answers. Just the memory of a sky that turned the wrong color for a fraction of a second, and a sound that shouldn't have existed at all. I'm from Scotland, and when I was a child, my mum and dad took my sister and me on a short trip to Fort William, up in the Highlands. It was meant to be a calm family holiday, nothing exciting or adventurous. It wasn't winter, so there was no skiing. The plan was simple. We would do some easy hiking during the day, enjoy the scenery, and stay a couple of nights before heading back home. At the time, it felt like just another family trip, something ordinary that blended in with many others. Fort William itself felt different from the places we usually stayed. It was quieter, more remote, surrounded by mountains that seemed to close in around you. Even during the day, the place felt older somehow, like time moved a little slower there. I didn't think much of it back then, but looking back, the atmosphere mattered more than I realized. I can't remember the name of the hotel we stayed in, but I remember how it felt very clearly. It was old-fashioned, or the kind of hotel that had probably been standing there for decades, maybe longer. The carpets were thick and slightly worn. The furniture looked heavy and solid, and the walls felt thick, like they were meant to keep something in as much as keep the cold out. Everything creaked a little when you moved. Not loudly, but enough to remind you that the building was old and always settling. We were all staying in one room. There was a single bed on one side, which was mine. A double bed in the middle where my parents slept, and another single bed on the other side for my sister. The layout felt tight, but comforting in a way, like we were all close enough to feel safe. At that age, I was a very anxious child. Fear was something I lived with constantly. I was scared of the dark, scared of being alone, and especially scared of the idea of ghosts or anything unseen. Even at home, sleep didn't come easily to me. As soon as the lights went out, my imagination would take over. Shadows felt threatening. Silence felt loud. My mind would fill in the gaps with things I didn't want to think about. Being in an unfamiliar place only made that worse. That first night in the hotel was no different. I remember lying in bed for a long time, tossing and turning, trying to find a comfortable position. I stared into the darkness, watching the faint outlines of furniture and shadows on the walls. The room was quiet, but not completely silent. There were faint sounds you only notice at night in old buildings. Soft creaks, subtle shifts, the distant sound of wind outside. Every noise felt amplified because I was already on edge. Eventually, I lay flat on my back and tried to calm myself down. I remember telling myself over and over that there was nothing to be afraid of. My parents were right there. My sister was right there. We were safe. It was just an old hotel, and old places make noises, that's all. That's when I felt it. The bed dipped slightly near my feet. At first, it was so subtle that I wondered if I had imagined it. But then I heard the mattress creak. It was the unmistakable sound of an old bed reacting to weight. The kind of sound you hear when someone sits down slowly. My heart immediately started pounding. I held my breath, listening, trying to understand what was happening. The room had been completely quiet just seconds before. I hadn't heard my sister get up. I hadn't heard my parents move. Or there were no footsteps, no rustling of sheets, nothing that explained why the bed would suddenly shift. Someone was sitting at the foot of my bed. The thought hit me fully formed, sharp and terrifying. Before I could even react to that realization, whatever it was moved. I felt the weight shift, and the mattress creaked again as it settled directly on top of my feet. The pressure was real, solid, heavy enough that there was no mistaking it for a dream or a trick of my imagination. So my feet instantly felt ice cold. It was like the warmth was being drained out of them, pulled away by whatever was touching me. The contrast was shocking. One moment I was warm under the blankets. The next, my feet felt like they were pressed against something frozen. I was completely frozen with fear. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe properly. My body felt locked in place, like any movement would make things worse. My mind raced, but my body refused to follow. But then it moved again. The weight lifted off my feet slightly, and for a brief moment I thought it was gone. But then it settled back down next to them. Once more the mattress shifted and creaked in that slow, deliberate way. The sound felt impossibly loud in the darkness. Every small noise echoed in my head, making my fear grow. Within seconds, the cold became unbearable. But it wasn't all over my body. That's what made it worse. The cold started at my feet and slowly began to rise upward, on inch by inch. First my ankles, then creeping higher. Along with the cold came a deep pressure, like something was pressing down through the bed, holding me in place. It wasn't pain, but it was overwhelming, heavy, inescapable. I kept my eyes tightly shut. I was too terrified to open them. I was convinced that if I did, I would see something sitting there. Something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that would make the fear permanent. Closing my eyes felt like the only small bit of control I had left. I tried to call out to my mum. I wanted to scream her name, to wake everyone up, to make it stop. But fear held my voice back. My chest felt tight. My throat locked up completely. I knew I needed to make a sound, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The cold had reached my ankles by then, creeping higher with slow, horrible certainty. It felt like it was claiming me piece by piece. When I finally managed to scream my mum's name, it felt like forcing the sound out of myself, like tearing it free. The scream came out broken and panicked, but it was loud enough. The room exploded into movement. Lights switched on suddenly, flooding the room with brightness. My parents sat up in bed, confused and alarmed. My sister woke up too, frightened by my shouting. The sudden change was overwhelming. The moment the light filled the room, the sensation vanished. The pressure was gone. The cold disappeared instantly, as if it had never been there at all. My feet felt normal again. Warm. Human. There was nothing at the foot of my bed, nothing on the mattress, nothing anywhere in the room that could explain what I had felt so clearly just moments earlier. The bed looked exactly the same as it always had. I don't remember much of what was said after that. I remember crying, shaking, trying to explain what had happened through sobs and broken sentences. My parents tried to calm me down, telling me it was probably a bad dream, that I must have been half asleep. They meant well, and I know they were trying to protect me. But I knew I had been awake. I knew the difference between a dream and reality. I knew what weight felt like. I knew what cold felt like. And I knew how real it had been. The next night my dad slept in that single bed. I refused to go anywhere near it. I stayed in the double bed with my mum, pressed close to her side. I barely slept at all. I lay awake for most of the night, listening to every sound the room made. Every creak made my heart jump. Every shift of the building made my stomach tighten. Nothing else happened, but I never truly relaxed. When the trip ended and we went home, life slowly returned to normal. But that night stayed with me. It didn't fade like other childhood fears. It settled deep, becoming something I carried quietly with me. To this day, I have no explanation for what I experienced in that hotel room. I don't know if it was my imagination. I don't know if it was some form of sleep paralysis. I don't know if it was something else entirely. I've tried to explain it to myself in 100 different ways over the years, but none of them feel complete. What I do know is what I felt. I know the weight. I know the cold. And I know how real it was in that moment. Even now, remembering it as an adult, the fear feels exactly the same. Cold, heavy, and very close. When I was in high school, my uncle would sometimes give me a little money to help babysit his kids. It wasn't a real job or anything official. It was more like a family favor. I'd come over, keep an eye on the kids, make sure nothing went wrong, and help out while my uncle and aunt handled things around the house. Sometimes they needed to run errands. Sometimes they were working on things inside or outside. And sometimes they just needed an extra pair of eyes. Or they lived in a nice 2-story house near the water. It was the kind of place people describe as peaceful. Clean streets, quiet neighbors, trees lining the road. The type of area where you feel safe without even thinking about it. Nothing about the house itself ever felt strange to me. No creepy reputation, no odd smells, no dark corners that made you uncomfortable. It was just a normal family home. At that time, their kids were about 3 and 6 years old. Old enough to talk, laugh, play, and make noise, but still young enough to need supervision. I had babysat them many times before, and nothing unusual had ever happened. No weird noises, no strange feelings, just regular afternoons with kids running around, toys on the floor, and cartoons playing in the background. One afternoon, I was sitting alone in the den. The kids weren't with me at that moment, and the house felt calm. I was on my phone, scrolling without really paying attention to anything. The TV was off. Yes, there were no footsteps upstairs, no doors opening or closing. Just that quiet, normal sound a house makes when nothing is happening. The low hum of air, distant outdoor noise, and the faint feeling of stillness. Then I heard a baby crying. It immediately caught my attention because it sounded close. Not loud, not echoing, but nearby. The sound was muffled, like it was coming from another room, but it was clear enough that there was no mistaking what it was. It wasn't a scream or a shout. But it was a steady, distressed baby cry. My first thought was simple and logical. I assumed the 3-year-old was upset about something. Kids cry all the time. That's normal. Nothing about that thought seemed strange or alarming. I stood up and walked toward the bottom of the staircase. As I got closer, I could tell for sure that the crying was coming from upstairs. It wasn't moving. It wasn't fading. It stayed consistent, like the source was fixed in one place. I called out for my aunt, or assuming she was upstairs dealing with it. There was no response. The crying continued. I waited a moment and then called her name again, a little louder this time. I expected to hear footsteps, or her voice answering back, or at least some kind of movement upstairs. Nothing. The sound didn't change. It didn't pause. It didn't shift locations. It just kept going, steady and distressed, as if it had no awareness that I was even there. I called her name one more time, louder than before, and waited. Still nothing. At that point, I started to feel slightly annoyed. Not scared, just annoyed. I thought maybe she was busy or hadn't heard me, and I didn't want to just stand there while a kid was crying. So I started walking up the stairs. That's when everything stopped making sense. As I took a few steps upward, I suddenly heard laughter from outside. Clear, happy sounds. Children laughing, my cousins' voices. and right along with them, my aunt's voice too. Or they were outside together, playing, completely relaxed and unaware of anything happening inside the house. My brain struggled to process that for a second. I stopped moving. The realization hit me all at once, and it was physical. Every hair on my body stood up. I felt a cold rush shoot straight down my spine, like my body had recognized danger before my mind had time to understand it. My chest tightened. My stomach dropped. I stood frozen on the stairs, listening. The baby was still crying. There was no baby in the house. That was the moment fear replaced confusion. Not loud fear, not panic, but something deep and instinctive. Something that told me very clearly that I should not go any farther. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I didn't try to check the rooms upstairs. I didn't even turn my head quickly. I slowly turned around, step by step, walked back down the stairs, grabbed my keys, and headed for the front door as quietly as I could. As I closed the door behind me, I could still hear the crying coming from upstairs. That sound followed me all the way to my car. I got in, shut the door, and drove away without telling anyone where I was going or why. I didn't stop to explain. I didn't look back at the house. I just left. For years after that, I didn't talk about what happened. I didn't tell friends. I didn't bring it up to family. I didn't want to hear someone laugh it off or tell me I imagined it. I knew what I heard. I knew how real it was. But I also knew how ridiculous it might sound if I tried to explain it. So I kept it to myself. Then, a few years later, at a family party, things changed. I had been drinking. Not dangerously drunk, but enough that your guard comes down. Enough that old memories start slipping out. Things you've kept buried for a long time. Somehow the story came up. I finally told my uncle what had happened that day. I explained everything from beginning to end. The crying, the stairs, hearing them outside, when leaving without a word. I expected him to laugh. He didn't. Instead, he went completely quiet. After a moment, he told me something that made my stomach drop. He said that he and his wife had heard the baby crying too. Not once, not twice, many times. Enough that it became something they talked about seriously between themselves. Then he told me something else. Before they bought the house, the previous owners had lost a baby. The child had died of SIDS. And the room where the baby had passed away was the upstairs room where the crying always came from. My uncle is deeply Catholic. His faith is a big part of who he is. He told me that after a while, he decided to have a mass said for the baby. Not because he was afraid, not because he believed the house was haunted in a dramatic way, but because he believed something needed peace. After that, the crying stopped. He told me it never happened again. Even now, talking about it still gives me chills. Not because of the sound itself, but because of how normal everything felt right up until it wasn't. How easily something impossible slipped into an ordinary afternoon and then disappeared without explanation. What stays with me the most is that instinctive reaction. The moment when my body told me to leave before my mind fully understood what was happening. That deep, unspoken warning that didn't need logic or proof. Some sounds are not meant to be followed, and some doors are better left unopened. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just fade away, they stayed with you. Each one was shared to feel real, quiet, and close. Moments that could happen to anyone. Moments where something felt wrong, or nearly did. If you'd like to keep listening to stories that linger long after they're told, consider subscribing to Sleepy Shadows. There are more waiting in the dark, and not all of them disappear by morning. Good night.